Rob here at etrailer.Com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs for the rear axle on our 2018 Toyota RAV4. Now, whether you're towing a boat trailer, jet ski trailer, or maybe you just have a car full of gear, or you have a cargo carrier on the back of your RAV4 carrying a lot of gear, we get a lot of weight added to the back, and the back end starts to sag down. Now, this is going to do a couple different things. Our ride quality is going to suffer because our suspension is not having as much travel, which means potentially we could start bottoming out, just really uncomfortable ride. Not to mention all the strain and stress that it puts on the rear suspension, eventually wearing things out. And then here in the front is actually going to start stretching upwards because it's going to cause a teetering effect all the weight on the back of our RAV4. So our tires aren't going to have as much contact to the ground, which means our steering and braking is going to be diminished, and our headlights are going to be pointing further up, potentially blinding people when we're driving down the road. So before we put our airbags installed, we have our cargo carrier loaded up because we don't have our boat here that we normally tow. So we have the tongue weight on the hitch, and we're going to take it through our test course and see how it handles. As I come to my slalom course, I'm going to be going through about 10 miles an hour just to keep everything really consistent. But I immediately can tell that there's a pretty big load in the back, or at least it feels like it is. Because every time I go in and out of the turn, it feels like the back end wants to swing around really fast as soon as I'm coming out of it. Not to mention, as I go in, I can definitely feel the body roll, and it just feels like I really need to slow down a little bit and maybe not go through the turns quite as fast. As I'm going into my bump course, I can immediately tell that something's in the back, because every time I go over the bump, the front end kind of acts pretty normal, but as soon as the back tires go over the speed bump, it starts jarring through the seat. It's just not a lot of suspension travel. It'll go up a little bit, slam down really hard on those bumps. So overall, it's just not very comfortable, and I really would not want to drive around like this for a long time. With our bags installed, we got about 30 PSI in there with the exact same load. Now, it didn't bring it all the way up back to factory ride height. We still have a little bit of a squat, but we're going to take it back on our test course and see how much it improved the ride quality and if we can actually tell the difference. Now, again, I'm coming up to my slalom course, and I really want to keep everything as consistent as possible so we can take out as many variables as we can so give a real test of before and after. So I'm going to go through the course again at 10 miles an hour, going the same speed and taking the same path. And even before I get in the course, I can already feel a major difference. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it drives completely like there's nothing back there, because clearly there's some weight back there, but it's a lot more manageable. I don't really feel like it's pushing and pulling me around as much. It just feels a lot more stable and a lot more comfortable to drive. As I'm going through the bump course, same thing. I'm going to go a nice steady 5 miles an hour, just like I did last time. And honestly, as I go over these bumps, it feels more like there's not something in the back. Don't get me wrong, I know there's something back there, I can kind of feel it, but for the most part, going over the bumps is pretty standard. I don't have a jarring feeling. The suspension feels like it's a little bit softer, but also has a little bit more stability to it. It's just a little bit more cushy, and it's not as so hard on my back. It took a lot of the unnerving feeling out of it, and just the uncomfortableness kind of went away. So after driving it before and after, I can honestly tell you I really felt a major difference with the bags installed. But now that we've taken them on our test course, let's take a closer look how they look once they're installed. They're actually going to fit inside of our existing coil springs, so they're not going to allow our springs to compress as much, because once we put the air in there, it's going to stiffen everything up and give us all that support we need, whether we have a lot of gear in the back of our RAV4, a cargo carrier, or if we're pulling a trailer, all that weight's going in the back. So these are definitely going to help support everything and give us a nice comfortable ride while doing it. Now, we're going to have a bag on each side of our vehicle, so they'll work independently from each other, which is going to help out in a few different ways. If we have an off-center load that's heavier on one side, our bags will help compensate for that and keep our RAV4 nice and level. But at the same time, if we just have a lot of people in the back or a lot of gear in the back hatch, and we go to take a turn, we typically get a lot of body roll. Well, this is going to help stiffen that up so we can go through turns and not have to worry so much of an uneasy feeling and not handling correctly. Now, each one of our bags is going to have its own separate inflation valve. That way we can adjust them side to side for those off-center loads. If you like, you can put a T in line so we only have one inflation, and then we would just be able to fill both bags up at the same time and get front to back level. Now our bags are going to be made of a durable elastic polyurethane, so they're going to have years of comfort and stability for us on our RAV4. Our kit's going to come with everything we need to get it installed. All the bags, hardware, airlines, and everything. However, if you'd like to add a compressor later on so you can adjust your bags without having to get in and out manually, those are sold separately and can be added in. Now our bags are designed to give us that load leveling support. Just keep in mind they're not going to increase the payload or capability of your RAV4, so you want to double check your owner's manual and never exceed the manufacturer's recommended towing weight. But our bags are going to operate between 5 and 35 psi, so you want to hook up your load and then inflate the airbags within that range and get it as close to level as possible when you're looking at it from the side. However, you may not get right back to factory height and back to level, but it is still going to provide us that support, so even a little bit of sag in the rear end, we're still going to get the benefit of the handling and improved braking. As far as the installation goes, it's going to be pretty straightforward. We're not going to have to cut anything. The hardest part about it is going to be getting the bag inside the coil spring. But we'll give you a couple tips and tricks, show you how we routed all our airlines. In fact, let's go ahead and do everything together. To begin your installation, you want to lift your RAV4 by the frame. Now you want to make sure you have jack stands and everything in place to make sure it's going to be secure, but you want to lift it so that the back end, the suspension can hang down. At this point we need to prepare our bags, so we want to grab the length of airline out of our kit, the small plug, and one of the bags. You're going to want to grab 2-3 inches of airline, just enough that we have a little bit of excess that we can put it in the bag, and you're going to want to cut it using a tubing cutter so we know we have a nice clean straight cut. We don't have to worry about any kind of leaks or anything, but we'll take our airline, we're going to push it into the bag. You'll feel it bottom out. You want to push it all the way in, and at this point we can see that we can let air out and it'll fill back up. What we need to do is squish our bag so we can get it as small as possible, and before we let go we're going to put the plug in to keep the air from going back inside. It may help if you squeeze it with your hands. Even if you have to use your knee, your leg, or your foot or anything, you want to get that bag as small as you can and then as thin as you can, and get that plug in there so it'll stay in that shape. Now we move over to our coil spring. We want to grab the lower protector plate. Now this we can just slide in right in between our springs, and it's actually going to drop down all the way here. So we'll drop it in. We can see it's going to sit right there. For now, we're just going to push it out of the way towards the outside so we have plenty of room in this area right here. Then we can take the upper protector now. It's going to be the black piece. It's going to have a hole going through it. We're going to take this piece, and you can either come from the bottom, push it up, and then just use your other hand to help work it all the way to the top. We're going to put the hole right around that stud on top and just push it up, and it should hold itself in place. Now we need to take our bag. We want to make sure that the airline coming out and that fitting is pointing down, and we're going to need to squeeze this until we can get it in between the coil springs and fully seated inside there. Now it is going to be a pretty tight fit, but in the instructions it's going to tell you do not use anything sharp to be pushing on it. You can use the handle of a screwdriver or something kind of blunt to help work it in, and soapy water might help as well. But I found if I just really start working it with my hands, it's a little bit easier than using tools to get it in there. Once you have your bag in place and it's fully in the coil spring itself, I want to pull the plug out of our airline tube so that our bag can start to reinflate and go back to its normal shape. Now it may not completely spring back all of a sudden. Just need to kind of work it around with our hands until we can get most of the creases out and it is filled back up the way most of the way. Just might have to just work it around with your hands and get it to seat properly. Then we want to push it as far up to the top as we can and make sure our airline is still coming out of the bottom here. Now we need to remove that airline, and if we look at the ring that it goes into, it's got a little collar on it. What we need to do is we need to push in on that collar at the same time that we pull down on the airline, And since we have limited space in here to use our hands, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pair of needle nose pliers. I'll push up on the ring with the pliers and then pull down on the airline and it should release. Now once you have your airline tube out, go ahead and hold on to this because we're going to do the same thing for the other side. You want to move the lower spring protector, and it's going to have a large hole and a small hole. You want to lift it up so that large hole lines up with our bag, and you'll see where that inflation valve goes into it. We're going to line that hole up and push it up against the bag to where it should stick to the bag and hold itself up. Once you have both your bags installed, you're going to want to find the center point of your airline tube. The easiest way to do that is just take both ends, put them together, and run your hand down so you come to the end. Again, we'll use our tubing cutter to get a nice clean cut our airline tubes, and then now we'll have enough for each side so that we can run our airline to the back or wherever we choose to mount it. And the way we're going to put them in is just like we did with our plug. We'll just take our airline, go up through the hole that's in the bottom of that protector, push it up until it locks into place, and then we're going to route this wherever we're going to mount our inflation valves. Now we're going to put ours on the back of our vehicle, but whenever you're routing it, you want to stay away from any moving parts, anything with excess heat, anything that may damage the airline tube itself. So we're going to go ahead and route both of ours, and we'll show you how we got them to the back. Over on the passenger side, I took my airline, I came back up, and I actually secured it to some existing wiring that's right above the rear subframe here. That way I get it far away from the exhaust as possible. Did the same thing with my driver's side, except once I got to the subframe up here, I ran it over towards the driver's side again. Underneath this panel, I zip tied the end of it to my hitch. Then I have my airlines coming out right at the edge here. Now we went ahead and mounted up a no-drill bracket. That way we could mount our inflation valves, make it a little bit easier. We don't have to drill into the body or put it in the bumper. And these are going to be sold separately, but I think they make it really easy to mount up the valves because we have our lines right here, and now we can mount the inflation valves, and whenever we want to air them up, we just get an air chuck, we go right underneath, really easy access. So we're going to grab our inflation valve, we're going to take the nut off, and really you can mount this just about any way you want. If you want yours facing up, you can put it in facing up, or if you want them facing down, you can put them in facing down. Either way, you want to make sure you drill a 5/16 hole so that your valve can fit through. But we'll take our valve, we're going to slide a flat washer on, go through our bracket, put another flat washer in place, and then we're going to secure it down using the hex nut we originally removed. Our kit is going to come with two valves, so we're going to put our driver's side towards the driver's side and then the passenger side across from it. So everything hand tight in there, and we'll put the other one in place. I'm going to come back with a 1/2-inch wrench and socket and make sure my valves are nice and snug. Now you don't need to really crank down on these that hard. We just want to make sure they're not going to come loose and that the nut's not going to fall off. Now you have the option, if you want to keep some excess airline, what I would suggest is you can push the excess back behind, then make a loop, tie it up maybe behind this panel. That way if we need to make a repair, we need to change anything, we have the airline available. But if you're not going to do that, you can trim your airline, and we're just going to push it into each fitting with the correct tube going to the right bag. Now I am going to take all that slack back and tie it up, so I'm just going to take the end of my airline tube here, push it directly into the fitting, give it a quick pull test to make sure it's not going to come out. Then we'll take the other side airline tube, do the same thing. And now that I know they're in place, I'm going to move back, undo my zip tie at the hitch, and again tie everything up underneath this panel for later use. Then you just want to take a little bit of air. We're going to put some in each one of our bags, and we're going to test each one of the connection points for any kind of leaks. Now, the easiest way to test for leaks is if you take some soapy water, you're going to spray it on all the connection points, And obviously we're going to have some bubbles because of the soap, but what we're looking for is expanding bubbles that are getting bigger and bigger and more bubbles, because that would let us know that air is seeping out and causing those bubbles. Right here looks okay, but we're going to keep going down our air lines and at the bag and spray everything and check for leaks. And once you know you don't have any leaks, we can set our bag to the appropriate pressure, and we can put the caps on, make sure we're not going to get any dirt debris inside the valve. But that'll finish up your installation and your look at the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs on our 2018 Toyota RAV4.